Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Tamala Floyd. Tamala is a trailblazing therapist, author, and speaker whose work redefines the path to emotional healing and self discovery. As a deeply compassionate and culturally attuned therapist, Tamala is celebrated for her ability to create safe, inclusive spaces where clients can explore vulnerability and unlock their inner strength. Through her work, Tamala not only addresses trauma, but also inspires a profound sense of self leadership and resilience by combining her clinical expertise rooted in her own journey of overcoming challenges and discovering the power of self compassion. Her practice is primarily impactful for marginalized communities, offering a bridge to healing for individuals often overlooked in traditional mental health care. With a masterful understanding of the internal family systems therapy model, Tamala empowers individuals to embrace their inner complexity, fostering transformative healing by listening to the parts within themselves. Her debut book, Listening When Parts Speak, is a groundbreaking guide that demystifies the IFS process, making it accessible to anyone seeking to achieve greater harmony and authenticity in their lives. Tamala is actively shaping the future of mental health care, and her work is more than therapy. It's a movement toward wholeness for individuals and communities alike. So, Tamala, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Happy to be here.
I gave a brief introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to who and where you are today?
Wow. That's a big question. I think primarily how I got to where I am today is comes from my background in my family. I
Mm,
am the oldest of three siblings that have the same mom and dad. I grew up in an upper middle class community in Marina Del Rey, California. So on the one hand, I had this privileged upbringing, and the summer trips every summer, went to private school. Um, but I also was living in a home where domestic violence was happening. So there was this pretty outside, and there was, some really scary things happening inside. And I think that that really led me to being concerned about people's pains and becoming a therapist ultimately, but just really sensitive to the pains of others as I was experiencing my own.
Thank you for that. I was going to ask you,
Yeah.
when you reflect on your early experiences, do you think that that gave you a glimpse into the dynamics of how trauma and life experiences can create parts within people?
Absolutely.
Mm,
Again, being a young child, growing up in a home with domestic violence and being terrified, really, many times. And also as the oldest, feeling that I needed to shield or protect my two younger siblings from what was happening. And with the age difference being 5 and 7 years, they were significantly younger than me. So I also took on the role of feeling that I needed to protect. So I get what it's like to experience trauma, to be in these very scary situations when we're very young and not developmentally ready or prepared to handle it or even understand it.
mhm. There was an experience that you shared in your book that was really scary, even just
Mm,
listening to it. And I can't imagine how that must have been for you as a child. Um, and, not experiencing domestic violence in my household growing up, but yet still understanding how childhood trauma can affect you.
yeah.
I wonder if for those who have experienced the same things that you've experienced, if they maybe feel like if they've gotten to a point to where they have had some healing, if
Mm,
they feel like that type of childhood or environment growing up had more of a profound effect on them than others who may have experienced maybe the death of a loved one or death of a parent
mm.
or had other types of trauma. Have you experienced anything like that with the clients that you've dealt with?
Yeah, I think that sometimes clients do feel like their experiences are worse than other people's experiences. And I kind of sit with trauma is trauma.
Mm,
And what I may have experienced, someone else may not, it may not have impacted them deeply. Something else may have impacted them deeply, right? So it also has to do with our own constitution and the parts that we have, how different traumas are going to affect us. So I don't like to kind of look at trauma as not even big and little. We have this idea that some traumas are more profound than others. I think there's also the accumulation and how does that impact
mhm,
folks. Sometimes people have one significant trauma that really impacts them significantly, whereas other people will have multiple, what we might consider smaller traumas, but then they are even more impacted. So I think there's what happens to us, and how often something happens to us.
mm.
Yeah.
In your experience growing up in your household with the domestic violence and the trauma that you experienced, did you ever feel like there was a part of you that had to stay hidden or quiet, or that you couldn't be who you needed to be?
Yeah, most definitely. I think that, and I'm not sure if that's as much related to the actual domestic violence or related to the expectations that my father had of me. I said he
Mm,
had expectations that, he said, and I mentioned this in the book, Listening When Parts Speak, that he has no average children. And so that meant that we all had to be above average. And there was a point in which I received an average grade. I received a C. And that said to me that I wasn't his child. And so that meant that in order to be his child, I
mm,
needed to be perfect since he had no average children. So things about me that were less than perfect or that my young mind thought was less than perfect, those things got hidden and pushed back so that I could be this perfect child that my father, or that my parts believed my father needed me to be.
mm. I think a lot of people can
Yeah.
relate to that. You almost
Yeah,
have to play a role in order to receive love, or love is conditional based on how you perform.
absolutely. That was the
Mm.
message, the underlying message. Absolutely.
Is
Yeah.
there any particular incident that stands out to you the most, or that I think may have impacted you uh, the most, impacted you greater than any other ones that you can recall?
Yeah. Oh man, greater. I think the one that impacted me the most is the situation that occurred when my father brought my siblings and I, my parents eventually divorced, and my father brought my siblings and I home from a visit, and my mother was entertaining her boyfriend, and my father, came into the house and they were upstairs, and my mother and her boyfriend were both deputy sheriffs. And so, my father's angry. He's broken a vase at the bottom of the stairs and he's threatening to go up the stairs. And my mother's boyfriend says, I have a gun, which I knew to be true because they were
Mm,
both deputy sheriffs. And my father grabbed me and started up the stairs. So in my mind, we were going to die, that either he was going to die or I was going to die. So that was much more traumatic than anything I'd experienced when he was living in the house. And that incident caused me to take on or my parts to take on this rage. I mean, there's really no other word for it. I had parts that became very rage filled.
mm. If you could sit with your younger self and discuss not only that moment, but other moments
Mm,
that were deeply impactful for you and created these parts of you that may have fragmented you internally,
mm.
what do you what do you think you would say to her, and how do you think she would respond?
So the beauty of my work, I've been in IFS therapy for over 5 years. So the beauty of
Mm,
my work is I'm in a loving, close relationship with that part in particular. I had that where things broke open is in my level one IFS training, I received a demo. And in that demo, we worked with this part. Now, this came after 20 years of therapy that I got some healing and connection with this part through IFS therapy. And that's what convinced me that this was the way to work with people who had traumatic histories. So really the connection that I made with this part, it was less about what I said to her and more about her realizing she was no longer stuck in the past and that she had me and we had made it out and I was grown and I was successful. So these were the things that actually helped heal her to realize that she was no longer 10, that we had grown up.
Does she know that you are a therapist and an author? And if so, how does she feel about it?
She does know those things, and she's
Mm,
very excited about it. I mean, and in many ways, she has contributed to the writing of the book, my work with my clients, because she brings that playfulness, that excitement, that creativity into all the things that I do. Like often when I'm leaning into things and I'm super excited, and her name is 10, I know that 10 is present.
mm, that's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Can
Thank
can
you.
do you mind sharing a bit what your journey becoming a therapist was and what led you to specialize
Hmm.
in internal family systems in particular?
Yeah. So my road to becoming a therapist was a very curvy, bumpy road because I started school thinking I wanted to be an attorney. And then from there, I wanted to be a meteorologist. And from there, I wanted to be a doctor. And each time I'm changing my major. And so finally, as a requirement for whatever major I was at that time, I had to take a psychology class.
Mm.
And that changed everything. I mean, after that one psychology class, I said, this is what I want to do. I want to help people in this way. And I always kind of knew I wanted to be a helper. I think hence law and medicine. But there was something about psychology that made sense to me. Um, and then the piece about making the decision, well, and even with psychology, initially I wanted to be a researcher. Like I wanted to research the human ills and
Mm.
then not necessarily be a therapist. But in that process, one of my professors said, I can't believe you want to be a researcher. You are such a talented therapist. And, the things that we were doing that, because you took some of those type of courses too. She said, you have a gift that is just innate. You have the something we can't teach. And at some point, I was in a PhD program. My family life was such that we had two very young children. And I made the decision that I really wanted to focus on the family. And then I remembered what that professor said. And I said, maybe I will become a therapist. That just feels more in line with my family life. And so that is when I shifted from becoming a researcher to a therapist.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
And the particular model of therapy that you specialize in is internal family systems or IFS. Um,
Absolutely.
for those who may be unfamiliar with IFS, can you explain what parts are and how they can influence our emotions and behaviors?
Yeah. So we all have these parts of us that we are not one mind. Our parts are, we have parts that are really helpful, but we are parts that are also burdened. We have parts, and our parts are there to protect us, right? And so when we talk about the emotions, these are really the emotions of the parts themselves. When you think about being angry, there's really a part of you that is angry or a part of you that is elated. So I look at our parts as little people within, right? And they
Mm.
have the complete personalities of any human. They hurt, they get excited, they have ideas and opinions. And so when a part is in the seat of consciousness, so to speak, we are going to be experiencing life and expressing from that particular part of ourselves.
Mm. That was a great explanation.
Thank you.
Um, I want to quote something from your book, and of course, we'll
Okay.
speak about the book a little bit more later.
Okay.
Um, but while we were discussing these parts, I want to drop a pin here.
Okay.
You said exiles receive the message that their natural way of being is not acceptable. Who they are is not okay, and to receive love and care, they need to change who and how they are. Can you explain what exiles are and what you
Yeah.
meant by that?
Just that quote, and that quote goes right to my heart. It's just,
Mm.
I'm just really impressed that that's the quote you selected. Um, yeah, so our exiles are those parts of us that for some reason received the message that they were unacceptable, worthless, unlovable. And so they get hidden within our system. They get pushed back by our protectors. And so our protectors don't want us to experience the pain of these exiles. So they get, again, exiled, hence their name. They get pushed back into the recesses of our mind, hopefully not to be expressed. But at various times, things may happen in our lives that are similar to our original traumas. And so these parts are expressed in various ways. And so the part about that quote that really touches me is that these parts can be joyous and lovable and playful, and something about them is seen as unacceptable or weak. And so they no longer express themselves in those ways. Another reason they want to hide these elements of themselves is because they're young and they need to be taken
Mm.
care of. And if me being joyous and playful and loud or whatever I am as a child is unacceptable in my family, I'm going to suppress that and hide it because I need you to care for me. And I want to be loved. And if those parts are seen as those parts of myself are seen as unlovable, then I have to hide them.
Mm. So, with these parts being hidden because of whatever message they received,
Mm.
how do they stay hidden and protected?
Mm. Two ways. One, exiles can choose to stay hidden and protected. Like they know that they will be harmed if they come out and express. The other ways that they're hidden and protected is we have two types of protectors. We have our manager protectors and what we call in IFS firefighters. And our managers protect by, what do I want to say? Overacting, if that's the right way to say that. But they are proactive. The
Mm.
managers keep the exiles hidden by engaging in maybe perfectionism or people pleasing. And they feel like if I please people enough or if I'm perfect enough, then this exile will not have to be expressed. I won't have to feel the pain of unworthiness. Our firefighters, on the other hand, are reactive. So when they come into action is when I feel my system feels the pain of the exile. I feel the shame. I feel the unworthiness. So then the firefighter, like I might have I do have a firefighter that eats sugar. So that firefighter will go into, eating a lot of sweets one after another in a very unhealthy way to douse those feelings of unworthiness. So those are the two ways that the exiles are hidden. Either they stay behind or one of these protective types comes in to keep them hidden.
So, when someone develops exiles from, I guess we can call it an injury, an internal injury, or
Hmm.
some type of trauma, what
Yeah.
what type of feelings do they experience internally?
The Well, I think one of the big ones is shame,
Mm.
embarrassment, rejection, abandonment. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Um, and none of that is anything that these parts want to experience. Not good enough, too much, not enough, both ends of
Mm.
that spectrum. So these are some of the feelings that our exiles would be holding. Yeah, another one,
Mm.
another big one is aloneness,
Mm.
because often in the pain of the trauma, they're alone. When I talk to you a little bit about my major trauma on those stairs and thinking that either myself or my dad was going to die, I ended up being alone with some really big feelings. The adults were doing whatever they were doing um, at the end of that, but no one knew what that was like for me. So I was left rather, holding these really
Mm.
big emotions that I didn't know what to do with. And so that's what became the rage. The protector, one of my protectors, took on the role of raging because they didn't know what else to do with those feelings. And the rage also protected my exile that was harmed in that, or part of me that got exiled that was harmed in that situation.
Thank you for sharing your experience with
Yeah.
it. I wanted to ask a question. Okay, so let's say maybe some of the clients that you've worked with, or someone listening to this who is finally understanding like what's going on with them internally,
Mm,
and they may be trying to connect what happened to them with why they are currently who they are today.
mm,
What type of behaviors have you seen with people that you've worked with, or just in general, that managers and firefighters um, will cause to happen to protect those exiles, to keep people out of
yeah.
those flames?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the things that we now diagnose as mental health problems, right, are some of the ways in which our protectors manifest. Things like anxiety, things like binge eating, depression. And although many of these, and this is what makes it very complicated, involve more than one part. When we're
Mm,
looking at depression, you may have the part that causes a person to feel very depressed, the part that keeps the person in bed, another part that feels hopeless and feels like it's not worth it for me to even try anymore. We also, at the far end of depression, we also have parts that want to harm the person, want to commit suicide, want to take them out of this misery by any means necessary. Then we have some of the firefighter parts. Like I said, I have this one that binges on sugar, but we also have the firefighters that engage in extramarital relationships, alcohol or drug use. So these are the acts, and this is why I like to describe them as people within. These are the acts that our people within are taking on in order to protect us, in order not to feel that protection is about not feeling that original pain,
mm.
that terror, um, that those traumatic experiences caused and created within us.
Okay, so because you know all of this, and because you are such a talented therapist, when you have a client come in, how do you create a safe space for them to explore and express from these vulnerable parts that have been hurt and need healing?
I absolutely love this question because I'm going to give an answer that I haven't heard many therapists give. Often when we think about the safe space, we think about what do we need to do to help the client feel safe now, here, in the present moment. But what we actually need to do as therapists is we need to do our own work. That
Mm,
if we have not done our own work, we are not going to be able to create the safest space that we can for the client. The other thing is in creating a safe space, what I like to say is that we're creating a safer environment and that the client has some responsibility in creating that safe space as far as what they share, how open they are, um, you know, being honest about what's coming up for them, even if it's about their relationship with me. And that's one of the things that I will say to my clients. But ultimately, if I don't know my system and I don't know my parts, then my parts rather, can be driving the therapeutic relationship instead of me being self led. So the more parts I unburden, the more self led I can be, and the easier it will be for me to create that safer space for my clients. So it's really about therapists doing their own work. So that's the part that I'm saying that most people don't talk about. So we've already heard all the external things we can do to create a safer environment, but it's really about us doing our own work.
that is a different answer, because in order for you to be able to hold space for somebody, you have to have the space.
Exactly.
And if you
Love the way
haven't
you
done the
said
work,
that. I love that.
if you yeah, if you haven't done the work to create your own space internally, when someone needs to maybe borrow your self energy or to be
Yes,
able to have a place to land what they're feeling with their therapist, if the runway isn't clear, there's nowhere to land.
there's nowhere to land.
Mm,
Absolutely. And so that's really my big push with when I look at the kind of the next things I want to do is I really want to work with the helpers to help them work on their parts so that they can have more space, like you said. More space is more access to self energy. And self energy, the other thing is self energy is intuitive. So the more access I have, I'm going to intuitively know how to create a safer space for this client. And that's another thing. The safer space is personal too. I mean, yes, there's
mhm,
some common things we can do, but it's also personal. So I get too, I'm speaking to what does this client sitting in front of me right now need to feel safe with me and with the information that they're sharing and know that it's safe to share that information. Some of that's going to be intuitive and self-led based on me having access to my own self-energy.
I love that. How long have you been familiar with the IFS model of therapy?
So I first read The Body Keeps the Score in 2017 and knew that the chapter on IFS was the answer
Mhm,
and immediately signed up for a level one training. So my level one started in January of 2018, finished in
mhm.
April. So since April of 2018.
Have you had any outstanding achievements with IFS or with the institute that you are proud of and want to share?
Oh my goodness, I do. I am the Institute's first Black solo lead trainer. And to extend that even further, I'm actually their first trainer of color. Prior
Mm,
to me becoming a solo lead trainer, every trainer in IFF was white.
wow, that's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, it's huge. Because you know what? Folks that look like me, folks from marginalized communities need this model. And one of the most efficient ways to get this model to those folks is to train people from those communities. And so
Mm.
that has been my mission is to have more therapists and practitioners from marginalized groups represented, trained so that they can take this amazingly healing model back to their communities.
So I think that leads perfectly into my next question, which is,
Mm.
in what ways do you tailor IFS to meet the needs of marginalized communities, particularly the Black
Mm.
community?
So, so another achievement of sorts really comes from the way that I have interacted with, particularly women of color. I just want to be really clear that that's really the clientele that I work with. Uh, I'd say that was probably 90% of my clients is women of color. But really, and Black women are the majority of that group. But working with legacy burden work is really where I see that I do something a little different. First of all, marginalized groups are carrying the legacies. Okay, first of all, legacy burdens are those burdens handed down to us through our generational lineage. But there's also legacy burdens that we call cultural burdens. And these are the burdens that we absorb from our culture and society. So if I just look at US culture and the burdens that exist, a big one for people of color obviously is racism, also patriarchy. Um, and so one of the things that I do is I work with that material first because that material is so pervasive and it also takes up so much energy and space within a system. So if a person before me uh, we identify that they have a legacy burden, I'm going to want to work with that first, because if we can unburden that legacy burden, the client will have more access to self energy so that we can then work with their personal burdens. And to a certain degree, legacy burdens are easier to unburden because they didn't belong to the person in the first place. So
Mm.
that's one of the ways that I work differently with marginalized groups, people of color, um, because we're carrying these cultural burdens that are, that we got to deal with every day.
So I want to break down a legacy burden a bit because you said it's
Yeah,
something that can be passed down and it may not necessarily be the person's who's carrying it. So for instance,
yeah,
if let's say my great grandfather was a slave
hmm,
and he wasn't able to feel his feelings or
mm,
understand why he was in so much pain, could that be something that was passed down through the generations that I feel?
absolutely. Yes.
Mm.
Yes. And the thing too is often we don't understand, why do I feel this fear, this terror, this lack of being able to express my feelings, um, this need to be self-sufficient at a level that I won't let anybody help me. It doesn't make sense based on my lived experience. These are some of the clues, or, you know, all the men in my family have a hard time expressing their feelings. All the women in my family are self sufficient. They're strong Black women. They do it for themselves. Those are all indicators that there's a legacy burden here.
Mm. Thank you for that. And I know you talk about that in your book,
Mhm.
and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your book, which is Listening When Parts Speak. What was it like writing it, and what does the book mean to you?
Oh my goodness. What was it like writing it? Um, a labor of love,
Mm.
truly a labor of love, because I got to write this book with my ancestors. This is truly an ancestor inspired book. My ancestors gifted me with the first meditation, which is a cabin with the ancestor, and told me in that gifting that this meditation will be part of a IFS inspired book of ancestor inspired meditation. And I just trusted that. And so, what it means to me is it means that this is a way for people to enter into their own healing journeys with IFS if they don't have access to a therapist or they don't want to go to a therapist. But it's also a book written for those who are in IFS therapy so that they have a better understanding of the therapy that they're receiving and also their own system and parts. Just another way to kind of dig in to the work that they're doing.
Do you recall a specific moment or time when you felt inspired to write the book? And I know you said that your ancestors helped you write it, but do you know what
Yeah,
exactly it was that inspired you, and what is it that you wanted
yeah,
readers to gain the most?
yeah. What inspired me to write this book is that I know that everybody can't afford IFS therapy or any other therapy for that matter, or will not choose to go, but still want the healing. I wanted to move IFS into the self help world. A lot of the help that I received before going to therapy, and even in times of just not being in therapy, I received through some of these wise self-help writers. So that was really a motivation personally, other than what my ancestors' motivation was. But my personal motivation was to bring IFS into the self-help world. It still is. I mean, that's it's absolutely my goal.
Mm. What type of feedback have you gotten since the book was released? And are there any specific stories that stood out to you most?
Yeah, so I just want to say I have such gratitude for the folks who reach out to me and send me the emails and the letters about how the book has impacted them. I think a main one is kudos to the ancestors. So that's the first one I want to share. Are the feedback that I get that I didn't think that I could connect with ancestors, didn't even know that ancestors could be impactful. I did one of your meditations. Typically, it is the uh, cabin with the ancestor one that really opened me up to being with my ancestors. And they'll say who came in, a grandmother came in or a great grandfather or, whomever came into the cabin with them. And now they have this beautiful new connection with them. The other thing that I'm hearing is how these are people that are in therapy, how reading the book has been a great accompaniment to their actual therapy work. And they're doing the homework assignments that are, each chapter has assignments anywhere from 3 to 5 assignments at the end of the chapter, plus a meditation, in order to really ground the work and the teachings of that chapter. So people are saying there are things that I wasn't quite understanding, or it opened me up to connect with my parts in a deeper way because of reading things in the book. So those things really are cherished feedback
Mm.
from the folks that are reading, listening when parts speak.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, if readers could take away just one message from the book, what would you want it to be?
One message from the book: that you have everything you need within to heal.
Mm. I think that may be hard for a lot of people to understand or even
Yeah.
grasp that concept. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, for those who may not be able to understand that, then there's a good chance for them to read the book and try and see why and how.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because that's literally what the book takes you through. It's a step by step. That's why it's called a practical guide to healing. It is a
Mm.
practical guide, step by step, of using IFS therapy for your own healing. The other thing that I've had, there's folks that I know personally that I reached out to and wanted to know, how the book, feedback about the book. Some of the feedback that I've gotten is I, I can't even give you overall feedback right now because as I'm reading this book, I have to stop. And
Mm.
this book is causing me to do my own work. Like, this isn't a novel you can just read cover to cover. This is a book that requires you. Things start moving
Mm-hmm.
within as you're reading this book. The things are the parts that are resonating with either my story or the stories that I have in there from my clients. So one of the feedbacks I'm getting, which really is feedback, right? Can't give you any feedback right now because I'm deep doing the work. That's
Right.
great feedback.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to any aspiring therapists who want to integrate IFS into their practice or to even write their own book?
Mm. This might sound a little redundant, but it is the answer. And that answer is to learn their own part.
Mm.
However you do that, whether it's in, excuse me, whether it's in reading the book, if you have not yet taken a IFS level 1 training, please do. That's obviously with the trainings, the training isn't just a cognitive, intellectual experience. More than that, it is a experiential connection with your parts. And so they need that. Um, and if they want to write a book, there are so many topics related to IFS and that I think there's room to write about them. I mean, like I'm kind of in this what I want to say. My focus is really the combination of ancestor wisdom and IFS, particularly in working with generational trauma. But there's
Mm.
so many aspects that we need to uncover and develop. So whatever their niche is, based on the clients they work with, once they learn IFS, that's what I say, specialize, specialize.
Mm. I want to ask you a personal question that I feel like it could be the same answer as a previous question, but with all the work that you're doing to help others, what is it that you want people to know most?
All the work. What I want people to know most is that they are not broken, they
Mm.
are not damaged, they are not harmed, that they are whole, and that the things that make them feel those ways, that they're damaged or less than whole, are their parts. It's just their parts that are seeking healing and connection.
Mm. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
If there was one thing that you could be known for or that would define your legacy, what would you want that to be?
Wow. One thing that I'd want to be known for. What would I want to be? Mm. I would want to be known as the woman who took all of the things that were challenging and traumatic and hurtful and transformed those things into messages and gifts and things to be aware of for others.
Mm. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you for that.
You're
All right,
welcome.
last question.
Yeah.
If you could use your platform to educate anyone who may be struggling with their mental or emotional health and might be uncertain on how or where to start, what would you say?
Mm. Mm. Ask me that one more time.
If you could use your platform to educate anyone who may be struggling with their mental or emotional health and might be uncertain of how or where to start, what would you
Right.
say?
So, on the simplest level, when people talk about how and where to start, is I would say find that compassionate ear, that person in your life that is compassionate, embraces you, accepts you fully for who and what you are, to start talking with them. Now, if you're at a place where you are open to going to therapy, I always say go to therapy.
Mm.
Find a good therapist, and you can interview therapists. You do not have to go to the first one that shows up. The first one. I tell people that they really need to find out if a particular therapist is a good fit. But there's also just those people in your life that are the compassionate ear. That's a really good place to start.
Mm. When it's all said and done, and you look back on everything that you've done and all of your accomplishments and all the people that you gave healing to,
Mm.
how do you think 10 would feel?
Very, very proud and satisfied,
Mm.
overjoyed. Yeah, yeah,
That's great.
yeah. Great question. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that we were able to do this. Thank you for sharing your time, your knowledge, your wisdom. If people want to find you online or on social media, where can they find you?
My website is just my name, tamalafloyd.com. I'm also on Facebook, also Tamala Floyd, and then I'm on Instagram at Tamala Floyd, one all run together underscore author, and that is under works. It's under construction, but it should be definitely live by January. My Instagram.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. And then what about the book? If people want to find the book,
So the book you can find at any major retailer, but Listening When Parts Speak is at Amazon, Books A Million, pretty much any major retailer you can find it. And it's also in audio, and I am the reader of the book. And actually another feedback, because that was a struggle for me to make the decision to narrate my own book. But the feedback has been very positive about how supported people feel listening to my voice, both in the prose and in the meditation.
mm.
So,
Okay,
yeah,
great. So thank you so much. Thank you
thank
again for
you.
sharing. Thank you for your time. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. And thank you for how you do
Oh,
it.
thank you so much, Jalan. This has been amazing. I so appreciate you inviting me onto your show.